Hey, this is Eric and I'm doing a quick trip to Madison, Wisconsin, and I just wanted to show you a couple things with charging in a Tesla. And this is about a 150-mile one-way trip, and I started and I've only driven 68 miles, and I've already used 45% of the battery roughly. I started with 90%. And I just wanted to show you, the first Tesla was showing I would drive with 8% left, but then it didn't like that my battery was cold and it wanted to preheat it. So if you look down here, my driving used 31%, climate 3%, battery condition used a whopping 11.5% of the battery. So just, it used like a quarter of my charge. And if you look at my efficiency down here, 430 watt hours per mile, that's because of the battery preconditioning. Without the battery preconditioning, that would have been only 30% used, and so it used maybe like 6 or 7 kilowatt hours, which is a lot. So you can really help efficiency if you don't need to charge or don't need the precondition. Unfortunately, there's no option to select it on the Tesla. Here outside the charger at Dubuque, Iowa, it's empty, but we do have an ICE icing one of the spots, Porsche hybrid. Back in the car is charging at 140 kilowatts because it preheated, which is nice. If I had arrived in Madison with 8%, the battery would have still been fairly cold and charging would have been slow, and I wouldn't have had enough to preheat at that point, but honestly I don't care too much. And a note about that Porsche blocking the spot, he's actually in a general purpose spot, so he's not technically in the wrong. He probably just parks there to avoid door dings, but it is a little annoying depending on the time of day. This charger's dead right now, but it can be busy later, like on the afternoon, like when everyone gets off work or on the weekends. This was a quick 10-minute charge. I added up to 61% there, and I'm going to add one more charger before my final destination, and which is like I'm supposed to arrive at 15%. So that should also be a quick charge, just enough to get back to this station. And that's a 250 kilowatt station, so it should be a lot quicker. I'm gonna stop. You always want to stop and charge before you get to your final destination, because the battery will still be warm and you can reduce that preheating that I mentioned earlier, or preconditioning of the battery. So charge first and then go do your stuff. Okay, the car just started preconditioning for the next charger, so I thought I would check in, and we're looking at 352 watt hours per mile now. This is identical driving through the driftless region with a lot of rolling hills, and you'll notice that it's doing 100 watt hours per mile better without preconditioning. The instant it started preconditioning, it started getting worse. So it got down to 349 before it started counting up again. So yeah, I just wanted to show you how much energy preconditioning uses. It is nice for charging speed though. So now I'm near Madison, and this supercharger didn't take nearly as much energy to preheat. The net was 360 watt hours per mile, so it took off about 10 or 20 watt hours per mile. If I go back to the navigation, it shows that battery conditioning used 5% of the battery, whereas before it was almost 12, and driving used 38%. So the second round of preheating doesn't use nearly as much energy as the first round. The first round used something like 100 watt hours per mile, which was a lot. This is also a 250 kilowatt supercharger, and I need to charge back up to like 65% or so, and I'll stop at the same charger on my return route. So this is a great one to have as a 250, because I'm going to be charging where it can benefit from above 150 kilowatts. The earlier charge didn't really matter because it was tapering below 150 kilowatts right away, so this will be a beneficial one to have as a 250. It's ramping up now. We're only at 105 kilowatts, but there it's starting to go up. I hear the fan on the charger unit itself ramping up. Let's see if we can get it up near 250. And then I'm also going to show you a thermal of the cable as we charge. So now it's above 200, so I'm going to go ahead and start shooting a thermal video of the cable. Using the thermal camera, you can see the temperatures listed on the cable there. I put my hand in the frame as a reference because it auto adjusts the brightness depending on the temperatures that it sees. So having my hand in there makes it more normalized. As you can see, even at 200 plus kilowatts, it doesn't really get that hot. Ambient temperature was around 35 Fahrenheit, as you can see on the sky when it shows it there. So in this temperature, cable temperatures were not a problem at all. I stop and show the tire temperature to show that it was quite a bit higher than the outside of the car. And you can kind of see that the screen is hot on the inside and the air vents where the heat was coming out. This charge stop is telling me I used 7.4% of my battery charge for conditioning and 342 watt hours. So again, I would still be a lot better than 342 watt hours if it wasn't conditioning, but it's a lot less than it was earlier. So for another 40% for driving, 39.6. So about the same as going the other direction. And I had a little driving around Madison, so looks good. But the problem is I'm still charging 3 times today to drive a total of about 300 miles. So a little over 300 miles. It's a little much to charge 3 times for that, starting with a 90% charge. So ideally, I would like to be able to drive that whole trip without charging, or one charge even in cold weather. So, you know, it's a little too frequent of charging still for current EVs, but it's a constant trade-off of battery size versus convenience that way, and cost of the vehicle, weight, those factors. So but it's still easy enough. I mean, this isn't a problem for me. I don't do this all the time, and even if I did it every weekend, I'm only spending a total of 30 minutes charging, so it's not a huge deal, or maybe 40 minutes. So, you know, it doesn't bother me too much if I'm not doing it all the time. Wrapping up my drive, I arrived back the same segment this morning. Took me 450 watt hours per mile preheating. Very similar conditions otherwise. It was slightly warmer now, but you notice it's about 300 watt hours per mile, so 150 watt hours per mile less with the return trip versus the trip there. I had a very slight tailwind coming back, but it wasn't significant. It says that it saved me 0.8% this trip, so not a huge deal. No battery conditioning this time, and driving was 27.3%. Earlier that was what, 30%? So I had a slight uphill on the way back. So, you know, overall the driving was a little more efficient, but mostly it was the preconditioning. So the preconditioning really eats into your battery. If I have data from Tessie, I'm going to show that as well. That's an app that you can use to kind of track your Teslas, and I'm going to look at battery temperatures and stuff with it. If all the data was logged successfully, I'll show that right after this. This first chart shows the current in and out of the pack. The green peaks are when it was charging, and the red is during the drive. This next chart shows the power from the chargers. You can see the 2 V2 and the 1 V3 superchargers that I used. And this last chart shows the battery temperature. You can show the 3 peaks before I start charging, where the preheating was operational. And as it charges, it jumps up a little bit more, but you can see that first one I started at about 58 Fahrenheit up to the first peak, and that was why it was so inefficient, where between the other two the temperature was much higher, so it didn't have to do as much preheating. So that second peak it used about 5% of the battery, the third peak it used 7.5% of the battery, and the first one it was almost 12% of the battery.